You don't seem American. That's what people told me various times while I was studying abroad in Paris. And with the tone that they said this comment, I could tell it was meant as a compliment. But I didn't really know what that meant. What did it mean to be American? What is it to be French? Do I feel that way? And who's creating these generalizations or these stereotypes? So these are the origins of my memoir, which is called Serve Yourself, Servez-Vous, which I will explain a little bit later. And I started really delving into who's creating these stereotypes. And I thought about the media, and in particular, travel literature, because it allows people who may not have the privilege or opportunity to go see other places to hear about other places and people through the eyes of somebody else. And this can be beneficial or detrimental. And I think in order to really understand why I decided to do a travel memoir, we have to understand a little bit about the history of travel literature and see the good and the bad sides of travel literature. So travel literature began in the 15th and 16th century, and especially Britain. So British elites were doing the Grand Tour and similar travels alike, and writing about their travels. Mostly they were rambly and long without any structure, because they were written more for reputation than having any kind of readership in mind. As time continued, women began to be a part of the genre, and this allowed for a little bit of diversity in representation of different experiences. For example, what location they would choose, or what kinds of risks they were allowing themselves to take. I want to particularly also focus on African Americans in Paris, because diversity and representation increased with time as well. And they provided another interesting context. So after World War II, France kind of became obsessed with American culture, particularly jazz. And a lot of African Americans felt free in France because they were not seen first as Black, they were first seen as American while abroad. And this created some really interesting perceptions and really interesting writings about identity. There's a book called Paris Noir, African Americans in the City of Light, that culminates all these biographical writings of different jazz musicians, intellectuals, and really represents a new, distinct perspective on what it means to be American. Therefore, contemporarily, there's a lot of focus now on travel literature as a way of displaying contemporary issues through the characteristics of the author, such as their identity, which I describe as age, gender, race, nationality. And through their writings, they can demonstrate various sociopolitical discourses. So what I'm trying to do is add a little bit to that. My project is a travel memoir that explores identity through the various travel experiences I had while studying abroad in Paris. I'm trying to see how my identity as a 20-something-year-old, first-generation American with Euro-Caribbean roots will impact my experiences and create an interesting, nuanced perspective on what it means to be American. But I think in order to really understand where I'm going with this and what I'm doing, I have to read a little bit to you. So I'm going to read to you chapter 1 of my memoir called La Fève. And it's based around the tradition of Three Kings Day of eating a slice of galette de roi, which is a almond frangipani tart with a little bean or porcelain figurine inside. If you get the piece with the porcelain figurine, you are the king or queen of the day. I use this as a symbolism to then talk about beans with renewal, growth, excitement of new experiences in Paris. Walking in the relentless Parisian rain, wandering around unfamiliar streets, trying to find something quick to eat, an enormous baguette-shaped sign protruding out of the ancient blocks of buildings signified our salvation. We had found a boulangerie. As we approached, the warm smell of fresh bread pulled us in like magnets. The four of us piled into the warm, tiny shop, filing behind a line of locals getting their dinner bread. Everything was golden, the variously shaped breads adorning the walls, and the glistening pastries delicately arranged in the glass casing like precious jewelry. As I surveyed my options wide-eyed, I spotted a familiar flaky crust filled with an almond frangipane, a sugary paste of crushed almonds. Although it was late January, they were still selling pieces of galette de roi. Typically, galette de roi are served on January 6th, the Three Kings Day, but I was not going to question the beneficial discrepancy. I had not planned on getting dessert, but hell, I was in France. I had to take advantage. Had I not bought a piece, I would have thought about that galette for the rest of the night. As I started munching on my galette with delight, pieces of the delicate crust inevitably falling to my shirt, I tried making a conscious effort to slow down in order to truly savor each bite. On my third bite, I was interrupted by something hard hidden within the layers of almonds and flaky crust. I had received the piece with the fève. There are some historical discrepancies on what exactly getting the fève piece entails, but the tradition to make the specific almond frangipane tart with a bean hidden inside, the fève, has existed since the Middle Ages in France, although it relies on early pagan traditions for inspiration. All sources point to a celebration of the person who receives the piece of tart with the bean. According to Charles Le Goffic's book, Fêtes et coutumes populaires, the royalty and nobility of the area would celebrate that person for the day by giving them money and allowing the king to eat with them at the table the next morning. Conversely, the French news magazine L'Express says the tradition is that the king has the obligation to give everyone at the table a monetary gift. In my family, it means wearing a yellow foam crown decorated with plastic jewels made by yours truly, and being treated extra well for the rest of the night. Both of my parents come from Catholic countries that give gifts to children on Three Kings Day instead of Christmas Day, as is done in the United States. When my dad's family moved from Spain to France, they quickly adopted the galette de roi as part of their habitual Three Kings Day festivities. My mother, from the Dominican Republic, tasted her first galette de roi much later in life. But because she adores anything with frangipane and loves to bake, this notorious French tart became my family's tradition as well. For the next 5 months of my sojourn in France, the galette simultaneously represented home and my new home. I wondered how else my experiences while studying abroad in Paris would somehow create connections with my family back home. Growing up with immigrant parents exposed me to much more than the middle American culture that living in Indiana usually entails. At home, we speak Spanish and French, and my parents' tight-knit friend group includes people from various parts of South America and Europe. If I had to choose an overarching theme for my household, it would be international. Not only was my house constantly full of people born in various countries, but we also traveled constantly. Therefore, I never felt like I ever had a very defined culture. I orbit around these cultural planets, the gravitational pull determining the shape of my orbit, yet each planet's pull is not strong enough to keep me from circling the other planets as well. By the age of 4, I was able to communicate in 4 languages: English, Spanish, French, and German. For this reason, my accent when I speak French is tinged with a Spanish undertone, instead of the nasal accent that training in American English inevitably gives. I had the privilege to visit Paris many times with my family throughout my childhood and teenage years, and the first few times I was not impressed. I thought it was dirty, perhaps because I was at a closer eye level to the dog shit on the sidewalks, gray and boring. My priorities as a child unsurprisingly tinged my perceptions. I only cared about having fun, not about beautiful ancient architecture and European history. In addition, I did not know anyone in Paris, so I was doomed to spend the days with my parents, whom I considered boring adults. I needed to grow as a person before I could truly appreciate Paris. I myself was like a little bean, under a layer of soil, unable to appreciate the city of light. As I grew into a sprout, the light became more and more important to me. Finally, as a young flower with leaves and petals, I craved the light and had more surface area to absorb it. By the time I was 16, I put live in Paris on my mental bucket list and promised myself I would make this dream come true, no matter the consequences. As you can see, the bean is not the central point of my story. I use it to get my narrative across and create connections throughout. Similarly, in chapter 2, I talk about burgers and the way it relates to Americanness and how my Americanness and Frenchness are kind of competing with each other, and how although I tried to escape my Americanness, it inevitably brings me comfort. In chapter 6, the last chapter, I talk about how each meal that I have with the different people I've met in Paris represents the different kinds of relationships I've created throughout my time. The importance of food for me in having this as part of my memoir is because France is known for its intense French food culture, but also because it's a huge part of who I am. I love food, and I wanted to represent that love throughout my memoir in order to get a little bit of my personality throughout the book. My goals in my memoir are to tell an entertaining story to increase sympathy amongst different groups of people, to remind us that we all have unique experiences and perspectives that are worth discussing, and to show that there's so much diversity in what it means to be American. If you want to access my book, you can take a picture of this, or you can also email me at vmenendez@bu.edu. Thank you.
Thanks, Valeria. We're now going to have a 3 to 5 minute Q&A.
Any questions at all? Yes?
Are you done writing?
I am done. This is the final manuscript. Sam?
What was the hardest chapter for you to write? Like either emotionally or like to find the right words?
So that would be the lonely, fluffy omelette, which is my 3rd chapter, I believe. And it's because it was very much just about myself. It was when I took a first solo trip, and I am a very gregarious person. So I thought it would be fun, and it wasn't as fun as I had intended. And it was hard to be honest with myself and seeing how much I really relied on other people for energy. So I had to be extremely emotional and extremely true to myself in writing that and being like, I hated this. This was very hard for me. And I had to delve more into my own feelings instead of talking about, oh, my friends and I did this, and this one aspect of French misogyny is really strange to me. So that was probably the hardest part for me. Yes?
Yeah. So one of the things that comes up in a lot of the travel literature from the 20th century is this idea that Americans go abroad and that's the first time when they realize, oh, I'm an American, and it's the first time that they sort of experience their own American identity. I wondered if you had a similar experience and if you write about it.
So that's kind of the basis of this book for me, is that I travel a lot. Like, I have had a passport since I was a baby, and I had my head held by my mother in the picture. And my dad is Spanish, but moved to France when he was younger. My mom's from the Caribbean, and we have family kind of all over. So for me, that feeling Americanness, I definitely do feel more American when I'm not in the United States. But everyone's confused when I start explaining my story, because like, oh, but you are born there, but like your family's not from there, and what does that mean? And so it's made me think a lot about what I think my American identity is. And I think mostly it's just what I'm impacted by. So like, I know more about American politics, and I know about viral things that were really important in the United States, maybe not as much in other countries. But it was definitely something I try to talk about throughout, because I don't like being American sometimes. And I think it's important to take everything around you and kind of be more of a global citizen than just stick to your nationality. Yes.
This was wonderful. Thank you. I love how you emphasize the possibility of self-creation or reinventing your identity when you travel, and write about traveling. Did you also encounter in your research the tradition where travel writers were seen as part of an imperial project, go abroad and map the world and make it in your own image?
Yeah, I read a lot about that, and how, especially during like colonialism, people would go to these countries and be like, oh yeah, the savages do this, and they eat these weird things, and that's really strange. And that's why I wanted to use this memoir as only speaking about my experiences specifically, and not making any judgments about anybody else around me, and trying to stay away from some of the history of like saying, oh, well, these people are different than me, so they're strange, they're other, and trying to stay away from stereotyping other people that I don't understand, then I haven't been there consistently. So that's why I try to put the focus solely on myself, because that's all I really know. Eileen?
Did you know that you were going to be doing this project while you were in France, and were you kind of journaling along the way, or was it all purely like retrospective?
It was a roller coaster. So I originally had some other project that I just created under extreme stress. I had just decided my major, biological anthropology, and they were like, all right, create a project. And I had no idea what the discipline was, because I just started. So I was abroad, and my advisor wasn't really responding to me, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was trying to kind of ignore everything from BU. And then I got an email, and they were like, you need to fix some things. And I was like, you know what? Actually, I want to do a whole different thing. So I had already been journaling just because I wanted to remember my time abroad. So it was nice to have that as a way to then eventually work. So I created my proposal, my new one, in 4 days, just like stuck up in a library, and my host mom thought I was dead. But I churned it out, and I'm very, very happy I did this. It's something that I've never done before, and I like how it turned out.